Welcome back to Talking Golf with Anne Liguori. And on this edition of Talking Golf, we take a deep dive into one of the most fascinating figures in sport and the defending champion of the Masters, Rory McIlroy, a generational talent, a global ambassador, a player who has dazzled us with brilliance, yet leaves us at times searching for answers.
Mhm.
And we are joined by best-selling author Alan Shipncuck, whose new biography, Rory, pulls back the curtain on this superstar, helping readers understand one of the most compelling personalities in golf. Hey, Alan, welcome to Talking Golf.
Thanks for having me back. I'm always delighted to be here.
Well, the last time you were on the show, you talked about Phil, your previous bestseller, and
Yeah.
boy, two very compelling personalities. You know how to pick them.
Yes. And in between, I wrote a book called Live and Let Die, which is kind of the inside story of, the battle for the soul of professional golf between the PGA Tour and Live Golf. And in some ways, this kind of completes the trilogy. I'm not saying I'm J.R.R. Tolkien, but it's like, Phil he's the bad guy of Live Golf, at least in the popular imagination. And Rory being the white knight of the PGA Tour. It's kind of a pleasing bookend to this very tumultuous period in professional golf. Because I would say probably, 4 years ago, Rory was universally beloved character. And in the Live era, he's become more polarizing. He was kind of the biggest troll of Live Golf. He was very involved in the tour politics and very disillusioned. But that helped me decide I wanted to write this book because the more complex the personality, the better it is, I think, as a subject of a biography. And he's not Phil. He doesn't have those same kind of demons at all. But there's been just enough messiness in his love life, his business life, on and off the golf course. It makes him compelling. And then, of course, it's thrilling to watch him play golf, as you alluded to. And um, in some ways, Roy's very much like Phil, that he's going to be remembered for and defined by his defeats as much as his victories. And then with the Masters last year, there's such a culmination of this long quest. It just seemed like the right time, the right person, for this book.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll get into all of it. But I
Mhm.
should add that Alan is the author of 10 books. He spent 25 years writing for Sports Illustrated, has won 13 first place awards from the Golf Writers Association of America, breaking the legendary Dan Jenkins record, which is very impressive, Alan. But look, since Tiger is dominating the news leading up to this Masters week, let's start with the fact that Rory had a poster of Tiger in his bedroom when he was growing up in Northern Ireland. And he always wanted to be like Tiger. So, if you would, can you talk a little bit about the Tiger influence on Rory?
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of parallels in their lives, both only children. Each of their families, their parents was singularly devoted to their golf education and, recognized at a young age that these kids had incredible, genius for the game. And so it's not really surprised, and both working class families too. They're not country club kids at all. Rory grew up in, the suburb of Belfast, kind of this war-torn homeland in Northern Ireland. And so I think Rory felt a kinship with Tiger at a very early age. He certainly was his hero and his role model. Um, but in 2009, when Tiger's life started to go off the rails, Rory had really just become he was just getting the first taste of stardom in golf. He was still very young, and Rory's watched this slow disillusion of Tiger's, artfully, curated facade, and I think he's learned a lot. They've become really close. They were very involved in the tour wars in reshaping the PGA Tour, and Rory still counts him as Tiger as a friend and a mentor. But I think he made a very conscious choice that he did not want the life that Tiger has, the scrutiny, the controversy, the the all the challenges off the golf course. And so it's interesting that Rory's kind of done it in his own way. And Tiger was, he was willing to pay the price. He broke his body and he destroyed his life to be the greatest golfer of all time. And Rory probably had a similar talent, but I think something held him back because he did not want to pay that high of a price. You some fans might be disappointed, but I think you could say that's the sign that Rory's a healthy, well-adjusted person, as he saw what happened to Tiger and he said, I'm gonna do things a little differently. And even if that means I don't win as much, I'll still be happier and I'll still be able to, play golf with my daughter into my old age, and I can still be this beloved elder statesman that spreads goodwill. And Tiger's legacy in his life is much more complex.
Yeah, certainly it looks like Rory has a healthier point of view and lifestyle and is trying to be more balanced. And what do you think Rory would say to Tiger at this point, particularly after Tiger's fourth car accident and his second DUI since what, 2009?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question like ever since Earl Woods died, there's been this vacuum around Tiger, and Earl was the one guy who could speak, truth to power to his son, and you know, there's Tiger's never going to have an equal on the golf course, but I think Rory's his equal in every other way. He's created his business empire. He's a leader of men. He's been involved in the politics of the sport. I think Rory might be the only player who could look Tiger in the eye and give him some hard advice, and Tiger might take it because he does respect Rory in a way that he respects few others because he knows that Rory's has the same level of talent and the same level of hunger that Tiger did. Um, and Rory's just he has a good bedside manner. I think he could do it in a way that Tiger might actually hear it. I think ultimately it's probably going to fall on Tiger's children to be the ones who are going to get him to change, and that's a heavy burden for them. But they're getting old enough, Sam's now in college and Charlie's a senior in high school. Like, I don't think anyone in Tiger's inner circle has that kind of respect from Tiger, clearly, because he's ignored them all to this point. And so it's interesting if Rory could reach him, that would be really powerful. Um, and if not, I hope that the Tigers kids are willing to do it because he's really the reason he's what Tiger's living for. I mean, they are the reason for him to get better. And um, hopefully he'll the message will be received.
I have to get your opinion on this because, in my opinion, for too long, the game has revolved around Tiger. And don't you think the powers to be who run golf should look to some other stars to lead these influential boards on the PGA Tour, to captain the U.S. Ryder Cup team? I mean, why is Tiger, despite all these issues in his life for many, many years, why does he still command so much importance to the game off the course? And he hasn't played, obviously, in a long
Yeah,
time.
there's just this cult of personality around Tiger. He's obviously an incredibly charismatic performer. Every golfer on the PGA Tour looked up to Tiger and idolized him in some capacity. And so that just gives you a certain amount of juice. But no doubt the PGA Tour and the PGA of America are rethinking this relationship because, it's presumed that Tiger will be the next Ryder Cup captain. There was supposed to be this sort of soft deadline to announce it around the Masters. And they've got to be looking in the mirror and saying, is this the right guy at the right time? The answer is obviously no. Tiger has to focus on himself. So I think I think that's probably going to get kicked down the road if it ever happens at all. Um, Tiger is basically running the PGA Tour. He's the chair of the Future Competitions Committee. All roads, all decisions go through him. I think that's probably a mistake at this point. And it's always kind of been this whispered thing. Like if you want to get Tiger's attention, the earlier in the day, the better. Michael Bamberger wrote about this recently. Like he would get erratic, he would get hard to reach. We can speculate why that was. And so, yeah, I think this is a sobering moment for everyone in golf to realize that these distractions and these responsibilities are probably taken away from Tiger's core mission right now, which is to get healthy, to get help. And I think there'll probably be a little retrenching, a little pulling back of his responsibilities administratively in the game.
We can talk about Tiger, for the whole show, but let's stick with
Sure.
Rory at this point. In
Yes.
1998, Rory, in your book, you said, told the BBC, I want to win all the majors. And some 27 years later, he finally was able to do that, capturing the career Grand Slam last year with his Masters win, and spent over a decade chasing, that final major win to capture their career Grand Slam. It's a whole different narrative for Rory now since that Masters title. What do you think that narrative is at this point?
Yeah, I think of Rory's life in three acts. Act one is this genius, this boy wonder who wins everything, gets to world number one, gets those four majors. He's on the same pace as Jack and Tiger, and life is kind of easy. And act two is this struggle to complete this quest, this lifelong dream to win the Masters, and then all the things he has to deal with on and off the golf course, with the business breakups, with the broken engagements, with the marriage, the divorce filing, the reconciliation, and the Masters and then the Ryder Cup at Bethpage really drops the curtain on Act Two. And now the question is what's in front of Rory. It felt like a good time to bring the book out now, and we can look back on how we got here and kind of look forward in a tantalizing fashion and wonder. Um, I think this Masters, next week he's either gonna win by 8 shots or he's gonna miss the cut. He may be completely flat and uninspired after this quest, and he might just struggle because he won't have the same energy around it. Or he's going to be totally freed up and feel like this is the easiest round of golf he's ever played, and he'll just shoot 63 on Thursday and keep going. Like it was very feast or famine with Rory. Um, but he obviously went through that sort of existential crisis we all saw after the Masters win, and talked about he'd gotten to the mountaintop and he had to look around and figure out what was next. I think the victory at the Irish Open, eagle putt on the 72nd hole to force the playoff, and having no tournament had really tortured Rory like the Irish Open, except the Masters. He won it in 2016, and everyone thought he was going to win a million of them, but he hadn't won there since, and there'd been a lot of disappointment, at his National Open, and so that kind of got Rory back on track. And of course, he was a towering figure at Bethpage. He went on to win another race in Dubai. He's chasing that all-time record for, money titles in Europe, and so. I think Rory answered the question. He still burns to win. He still has magic left. He's only 36. And there's a cute bit in the book. Like I asked this question to Pudrick Harrington, who's his friend and mentor, and Pudrick says, "Oh, I know the answer. I asked Rory on his wedding night, and he'd already had a few glasses of wine, so it was a good time to get a straight answer." And he said that Roy told him the number he's chasing is 9 major championships. That'd put him up there with Gary Player. It would cement Rory's status as one of the 5 greatest players of all time. And by that calculation, he's barely halfway there. And Rory cares deeply about golf history and his place in it. Like he wants to win an Open at St. Andrews. He wants to win a US Open at Pebble Beach. He wants to be a multiple Masters champion and put himself in a different category than the Danny Willets and the Charles Schwartzels. And so he he cares about these things. And I think he's gonna chase them really hard for the next 5 or 7 years. And you look at Jordan Spieth's body is breaking down. Justin Thomas's body is breaking down. You can go on down the list. Brooks Koepka. Rory's been very healthy. He had that little rib injury in
Good point.
2017, and he hurt his Achilles playing soccer with his buddies a decade ago. But otherwise, he has kind of that long rhythmic swing like a Phil Mickelson that holds up, and he takes very good care of his body. So. Yeah, I think there's a lot of big championships in Rory's future, and it's going to be
It'll
fun
be
to
interesting
watch.
to see if he possesses that same hunger, that same drive to defend his Masters title as he did to win it for the first time and capture
Yeah.
that career Grand Slam. But that's why they play the game. His parents sacrificed everything for their only child, and this story has a happy ending. Very few do to that extent. You
Yeah.
wrote in quotes, parents sacrificing everything for their child is a tale as old as time. Who couldn't get swept up in the journey of a working class family from a war torn land, nurturing their only child into an all time legend in the most patrician of sports? And that it's a dream come true for any parent, but what a fairy tale ending for his parents.
It's neat. And that's what's fun about doing a biography is you can get really into the details. And so like, you kind of always heard that Rory's family his parents worked really hard to support his golf dreams. But I didn't realize the extent of it until I really got into this book. I mean, Jerry McElroy would get up in the morning and he'd go to this local rugby club and he would vacuum the hallways and clean the toilets and get the whole place ready to go. He'd spend his whole morning doing that. And then he'd go to the local golf club and he'd serve as a waiter and as a bartender till 6 o'clock. So that's already a long day. Then he would race home, have dinner with the family, and go back to the rugby club and serve as a bartender till midnight. Then he would go home, he'd give his wife a kiss, and she'd walk out the door and she'd go to the local, 3M factory and place rolls of packing tape into boxes. Like you can't imagine a more soul-sucking job to do all night long. And at some point when he was a kid, Rory said to his parents, "Why are we not like a normal family? They are almost never together." His parents were just these two ships passing in the night, and they recognized that their son had something special. I mean, Jerry McElroy was a scratch golfer. His brother Colm had the course record at their club with a 63. They ca- they came from a line of golfers. They could see Rory's talent, and Rory's mother's side, there's some great athletes, including an uncle who played big time, Gaelic football and rugby, and so he was born with some tools, obviously, hand-eye coordination and things like that, but he just had this obsession and he was around really good players his whole life and he just developed this gift and his parents just never wanted to feel like we didn't give him every opportunity. So all this money they made, they poured into Rory traveling to Hawaii, to San Diego, to Florida to play against real competition. And that sent him on this journey. And it's really an incredible story how far they've come as a family.
Can you share that story that when you were talking to Jimmy Dunn, that he got from Rory's dad, Jerry, about Jerry spending the last few dollars on a bucket of balls for Rory when Rory
Yeah.
was only
Yeah.
9. I think that tells a lot about the parenting and what they were trying to instill in their kid.
Yeah, and so Jimmy Dunn, of course, is this kingmaker in the world of golf. He famously the first man to be a member at Augusta National, Cypress Point, Pine Valley, and Seminole simultaneously, and
Shinnecock.
plus Shinnecock and a bunch of others. And yeah, it's good to be Jimmy Dunn. And He's he became close friends with Jerry McElroy, and he's the reason Jerry McElroy is a member at Seminole. I doubt there's too many guys at Seminole who clean toilets for a living, but and tended bar. But that's so Jerry has had his own sort of great American success story. Um, but yeah, the tale you're talking about is, Rory's just a wee lad, and Jerry and Rosie are working as hard as they can, but they're spending it as fast as they make it on Rory, and so they go to the driving range and Jerry's down to his last few quid until payday. And so he goes and he puts some money into the ball machine and he gets however many balls he can. And, Rory's disappointed. He wants to hit, 5 buckets of balls, as was his custom. And Jerry says, "Listen, I've worked hard. Your mom has worked hard, but all we have left is in that bucket right there. And I want you to hit every ball like it's the last hole of the Open Championship." And it really tells you a lot about the level of sacrifice, the level of commitment, and why Rory has this gratitude for this journey he's traveled. He has all the toys, he has the mansions, and he has the jets and the cars and the watches, and the McElroys like the finer things in life. But Rory still has this appreciation when you see how he moves through the world and how he interacts with people that he doesn't have to be nice to. They're just the clubhouse attendants, they're the valets, they're the fans in the parking lot. But he's always gracious, he's always kind. And I think they've never forgotten where they came from. And that's a charming attribute in a superstar athlete.
Sure, similar to Arnold Palmer for sure. Arnold
Yeah.
had, treated everybody equally, whether you
Yeah.
were a janitor or a president, which is, I think, had a positive influence on Roy McIlroy as well. Well, Roy was 15 when he ended his schooling, and one of the tidbits in the book, which surprised me, came from, I guess, Roy's uncle. And you quoted him in the book. He said his nephew's impetuous decision making in business, romance, launching press conference barbs could all be traced to a lack of higher education. End of quote. Those are sharp words coming from an uncle, right?
Yeah, I mean, and to Rory's credit, he's tried to continue to expand his mind and to better himself. You know, he's a voracious reader, and not just of sports books, but like biographies, business tomes, self-help, even sort of new age philosophy. And I think there's some regret that he has that he didn't go to continue his education, and maybe he has some self-consciousness. And as he moves in these very rarefied airs now, and I mean, two of his best friends are two of the richest men in Ireland, JP McManus, Dermot Desmond. Like, it's a function of how far he's traveled in the world. And so, um, yeah, I mean, part of what makes Rory appealing is that he wears his heart on his sleeve, and um, that not just on the golf course, but also in the press room. And he says a lot of things, and they're from the heart. And but he also changes his mind. You know, he has some buyer's remorse, and to me, that's actually a positive attribute where he'll take in new information and he'll say, you know what, I was wrong and I've changed my mind. Like that's to me is a sign of an open mind, and it should be celebrated. But in the world we live in now, it's like you have to take a position and you have to defend it to the death. It's like I'm right, you're wrong, and go screw yourself. Like that, you see that in our political discourse, obviously, and even everyday life. And so I give credit to Rory. He'll raise his hand and say I was wrong, and whether that's calling the Ryder Cup a meaningless exhibition, whether saying he didn't care about the Olympics. He had a very public change of heart on both of those. Um, and it on down the line, but it makes him to me more human. It makes him more likable. It makes him more interesting. And
Sure.
we've gone through now decades of Tiger Woods press conference where it's just a word salad. He says nothing. There's no
Right.
content.
Nothing at
He won't
all.
take he won't take a stand on anything. And Roy's not that way at all. Like he's passionate and he puts it
Sure.
out there. And
He's so refreshing. And, he emerged as the spokesperson for the PJ Tour in their fight against Live Golf. And then he kind of did a 180 on that. But interesting, back at the US Open at Brookline in 2023, a day after I asked Phil Mickelson the same question, and Phil looked like he was going to kill me. I asked Rory, what does legacy mean to you? And with Phil, I asked, what does legacy mean to you? And do you think it's changed since you've since joined Live? But with Rory, he had a great answer and basically talked about how important it is. Money can't buy one's reputation. Money can't buy legacy. He says you strip everything away at the end of the day and you're left with how you make people feel and what people thought of you. He said that's important to me. And I still believe he feels that way. And I just think, that's a positive attribute of Roy McIlroy.
totally agree with all of that. And it's why he was never tempted to go to live golf, because he does venerate those who came before him. He does care about golf history, and he is aware of his career victory totals, and he wants to keep moving up the list on the European Tour and the PGA Tour. And those things matter to Rory. And um, the live golf, it's interesting because he was fighting the good fight in his mind. And Jay Monahan was hiding out in the tour headquarters, and Rory was on the firing lines every time he teed it up. Every round, he was talking about live. And he made it personal. He took plenty of shots at Greg Norman. He pretty much ended his friendship with Sergio Garcia. I mean, he was a groomsman at Sergio's wedding, and Liv broke up the romance. Now, they've sort of patched things up since then, but and then this framework agreement came down, and Rory was very disillusioned. But and then he started calling for reunification, and he supported the Saudi investment in the tour. And again, people said, well, he sold out. But it was actually a very nuanced, pragmatic view. And he said it right out his first press conference in Canada, right when the framework agreement came down. And he said he felt like a sacrificial lamb, but he said if I take myself out of the situation, this makes sense. If the Saudis want to be part of golf, we should partner with them, not fight them. They have more money than we do. We can't win that battle. Let's get them invested. Let's improve our product. Let's make them a positive force. And I thought that took a lot of courage and it took a lot of humility to say, yeah, okay, they did me dirty, but I'm going to look at the big picture here. And, again, people criticize Rory, but he was just being a realist. And I thought what he said made a lot of sense and it showed a lot of sophistication. But again, it's like you're not allowed to change your mind anymore. And that was forced upon him. It was he got sold out by these backroom bureaucrats. But to his credit, he didn't cry about it, and he just said, "Okay, the terms of engagement have changed. Let's see how we can make this work." And it's a big reason why he's been marginalized from the ongoing discussions on tour. He still feels like the game should be put back together and be better off if you could get Bryson and John Rahm back on the PGA Tour. And he's trying to be conciliatory. Tiger, his friend and business partner in the TGL, blackballed Rory from returning to the board because Tiger doesn't want a deal. He's Old Testament. And so it's a fascinating little behind the scenes drama. It all plays out in the pages of the book, but Rory has been this powerful voice, and that the tour has sidelined him in favor of Tiger is part of why we are where we are, where both sides are still at war. And we'll see how it changes. If Tiger goes off the board and that vacuum is filled by Rory, the tenor definitely changes.
Sure, that's why I asked earlier if you think they're still close after, a lot of these differences of opinion when it comes to
I'm,
live and the PGA Tour.
that's how
I,
that's how ruthless Tiger is. Even though they'd had forged this close friendship and they had this business relationship to the TGL, that he still blackballed Rory. I think Rory has a big enough heart. He'll let that go for in the service of maybe trying to be a good friend to Tiger, but it wouldn't flow the other way.
Right, exactly. Well, fast forward after the Masters win and the Career Grand Slam a year ago, Rory admitted to losing motivation, Alan, for a bit after that Masters win, and then he got pissy at Quill Hollow and would not talk to the media there, and that extended to the U.S. Open. And at Quill Hollow, he was upset that reporters named him in that, I'll call it driver gate, which was crazy.
Yeah.
He finally said at the US Open that he was frustrated with the media. He said he's been totally available for the last few years. He said he felt he earned the right to do, whatever he wanted to do. And wasn't there an incident between you and Rory on the driving range? Can you describe what happened?
Yeah, so that when you do a biography of a famous person like Rory, readers want to know what was their involvement. And it's a natural curiosity. And so I did go to Rory at a couple stages in this process of writing this book and asked if he'd sit for interviews and his manager Sean O'Flaherty, and they molded over and ultimately declined. And that's okay. I mean, Rory's time is quite valuable, and he didn't want to sit with me. I didn't take it personally. I've had a lot of access to Rory through the years. I've been covering him his entire career. I mean, I remember the first time I ever saw him swing a golf club was the range of the '07 British Open when he was still an amateur, and so um, I just went on my merry way. But I have a relationship with Bloomberg Business Week, and I was talking to them about doing a story on Rory's business empire because he's been very clever at
Sure
expanding it,
has.
and yeah, and it's all detailed in the book, and so um, and that would be a way for me to sit down with him, and of course I would have used that material for the book too. So it's kind of a twofer. So yeah, at Oakmont, I was talking to his manager Sean O'Flaherty on the range. This is before Rory's second round. This is like half an hour before his tee time. And Rory kind of looks back and sees us, and he's like, "Hey, Alan," and um, and so we look up, and I wasn't even paying attention to Rory. I was really focused on this conversation with O'Flaherty, and I look up and we make contact, and he's like, "Fuck off," and um, and me and O'Flaherty kind of froze. It was such a surprise, and Rory takes a couple steps and points his driver at me. He's like, "Seriously, fuck off," and um. So there was a packed grandstand behind me. There were NBC cameras, and it didn't seem like we were going to have a productive conversation in that moment. So I kind
I
of
guess
wandered
not.
away. But 2 days later, I waited for him in the parking lot after his final round, and I basically was like, dude, what was that all about? That was so unprofessional. And so we had a whole philosophical conversation about the book. And what the crux of it was, he said, it pisses me off that you're making money off my name. And I said, Rory, you made like $87 million last year. You commute to work in a G6. Like, book money is a tiny fraction of Grand Slam money, but it's really not about the money. It's about the control, because Rory has total control over his life and his image. And he knew he'd have no such control over this book. And that's unsettling for him because he calls the shots in everything. And
Hmm.
so that's kind of how we left it. But there is a happy ending.
Do you think Rory said didn't want to do the book, or his agent didn't want him to do the book?
Both, but Rory is clearly calls the shots on everything in his life, and so it was his call. But there's kind of a cute little story. So Pebble Beach, last month I live locally. I covered the tournament. Rory's defending champ, and that was a very important victory on this march to the green jacket. And so I had just gotten the books in, so I met Sean O'Flaherty for breakfast. I gave him a couple books, and I said, "Listen, I wouldn't pay you the courtesy of giving you the book so early if I thought you were going to hate it. Like I said, if you guys can read
Sure,
this with an open mind, I think you'll appreciate it." And to me, it's a feel-good story. It's
it
not.
is. I don't
It's
think
not.
you really got too critical of Rory
No,
in
I
any
think
regard.
exactly. I mean, Roy's had. I think he's conducted himself with a lot of class and dignity in a very public life, and he just doesn't have the demons of a Phil Mickelson. So I give the book to Sean that afternoon. Rory comes into the press room for, his pre-scheduled press conference. He walks right up to me, shakes my hand. He's like, "Hey, thanks for the book. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to reading it." And I said, "Keep going. I think you'll like it." And he said, "I'll tell you if I do." And so that was like a peace offering. It was very public. The whole press corps was there, tournament officials, tour officials. Um, Now on Sunday, a few days later, I've typed up my game story. I've sent it in to Scratch Golf, and I'm walking to my car, and it's dark and it's misty, and the whole place is cleared out now. And I see a couple of figures walking toward me, and I know from 100 yards away, one of them is Rory. I just know the way he walks. I know his silhouette. I've been watching his whole career. And sure enough, it was. He was with his caddy. They were going to get some food. And I mean, I made a joke like, of all the people you're going to meet on a dark and stormy night in Pebble Beach, and he laughed. And he said, I read the first chapter of the book. It's good. It's funny. I liked it. So me and Rory are in a good place. But ultimately, I didn't really care. I didn't write the book for him. I mean, I write for the golf fans. And that's 25 years at Sports Illustrated and a bunch of crusty old newspaper guys as my editors, and they felt like there was a right way to do the job. And you're brutally honest with the readers. And the collateral damages, sometimes the players are unhappy, sometimes the managers are unhappy, but the job is the job. And that's always kind of been my North Star. So I wrote the book I wanted to write. I'm happy that Rory's enjoying it, but that wasn't the objective.
The book is called Rory, Ellen, and Shipncuck. Let's talk about Rory McIlroy and his Ryder Cup history because, gosh, he's played in 8 Ryder Cups, every Ryder Cup from 2010 to 2025. He's a part of what, 5 winning teams. And I agree with what you said that Rory could go down and should go down as the most prolific winner in Ryder Cup history. And did you follow him around at Bethpage, especially when
I,
the crowds
I
got
did. I
overly
did. Yeah.
abusive? And
Yeah. And actually, he's actually been on the part of 6 winning teams. Like, of all the modern Ryder Cuppers, only Lee Westwood's ever been on more with 7. And so, Rory is the key bridge between these 2 eras of dominance. The Sergio, Ian Poulter, Lee Westwood teams, and now the John Rahm, Tommy Fleetwood teams. The one constant has been Rory, and he's 2.5 points away from being third on the all-times point list. He'll get that at the next Ryder Cup probably. Like, he's gonna have every Ryder Cup record there is. He's gonna play another 3 or 4 of them, maybe more. And so um, it's a funny thing that when you talk about the legacies of top players, people don't mention the Ryder Cup, except for Seve Ballesteros. And Rory's already won more points in Ryder Cups than Seve did. And so um, but yeah, I thought Rory's performance at Bethpage was monumental. I thought it was the most hostile golf environment of all time. And for him to get 3.5 points over the first 2 days, help Europe build this insurmountable lead, like he was a towering figure. And there was a lot of reporting about, and it was all kind of in code language, like, oh, the fan said personal things to Rory. They crossed the line. I mean, it was worse than that. And his wife was out there walking with him, and there was a lot of comments about Rory's marriage and about these rumors that have followed them. And, Erica McElroy had to listen to all of it. And that's why Rory was so fiery. There's that video of him flipping off the fans. His partner, Shane Lowry, almost waded into the crowd and started throwing punches. Like no one, you yell at a Ryder Cup, Rory, you suck. Okay, it's not great, it's not creative, but it is what it is. But when you start talking about his marriage, start talking about his wife, like that's different. And yeah, I'm sure the Yankees hear that, and maybe the Rangers hear that, but golf is just different. It's a different level of decorum traditionally. It's also much more intimate. When you're at a big arena, you can't get that close to the players generally. Um, Golf is just a thin little rope that's separating you, and it's a much more cloistered environment. And so, um, Rory's play at Bethpage is going to go down as some of the most macho golf that we've ever seen, and it was deeply satisfying for him and his teammates to witness it.
If anything, it made him more fiery and more the adrenaline kicked in even more so. I mean, I don't think, if perhaps the fans knew that they were just going to make him, just more intense
Yeah.
and better.
Yeah,
Perhaps they would have,
those were not masters of psychology in the Bethpage gallery.
and
Like,
I'm sure they were not knowledgeable golf fans either. But how much of that personal saga took its toll, do you think, on Rory's image?
I went to Bethpage needing an ending to the book, and it really, to me, the whole year was this redemption story for him as a player to finally win the Masters, finally slay the dragon, but also for Rory as a man, as a husband, because he filed for divorce and then he changed his mind a month later and they reconciled. Marriage is complicated. Like no one would want to have their ups and downs with their spouse in the public eye. And for Rory and Erica, that's what happened. And you can't imagine anything more challenging for a couple, but they came through it. And on that Saturday afternoon at Bethpage, after the second match, when the fan behavior had been at the absolute worst, I saw Erica McElroy in the behind the 18th green, and I kind of wandered over because I knew Rory was going to come find her, and he did. And they had this incredibly passionate embrace, and both of their eyes were glistening because he knew what she had just been through. And he whispered in, her ear, "I love you so much." And it was incredibly personal and powerful. And and then, after the victory during the press conference, Rory talked about his wife in the most emotion he's ever really showed talking about her in such a public venue. Um, and then there was this little stolen moment afterwards where he was, his eyes were watery and his voice was hoarse, and he was talking about it as the best year of his life on and off the golf course, and how thankful he was for his wife and for his daughter. And um, it really kind of completed this redemptive arc for him as a human. And so that's kind of how the book ends, and it's part of the feel good aspect to it because you know there was a lot of rumors that floated around about Rory, and ultimately we'll never know if they're true. Only Rory knows if they're true, and it doesn't even matter. It's what matters is where his heart is, and his is clearly with his wife. And it's a beautiful thing. Like we all have our ups and downs. Some of us are divorced or not, whatever, but we can all relate to that struggle. We've all had breakups. We've all had our heart broken, and for to Rory and Erica to come back together like that in such a public way. And I thought it was really lovely, and just on a human level, and then you layer in the golf on top of it, and so it just gives the book such a crescendo with the Masters, with the Ryder Cup. It was an incredible season to be bird dogging Rory, and so much stuff happened that was unforgettable.
Unbelievable. Well said. Just a brilliant book. Before I let you go, Alan, what surprised you, or did you learn anything about Rory in all your research and all these years covering him that you didn't know that really surprised you about him?
I mean, tons of stuff. Like that's the fun of a project like this is to go so deep on the details. Like you feel like you're an archaeologist, sifting through all these old newspaper stories and old photographs and, high school yearbooks and looking at photos on the walls of these clubs in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And then you feel like a private detective when you're trying to track down people from his past. And one person tells you one story and, oh, you got to talk to this guy. And then you spend all this time and you track them down. They're like, no, no, it wasn't me. It was this other guy. And then you're trying to find them. And then, he's dead, but oh, his son has a scrapbook and whatever it is, like the chase is really fun. And so, I mean, there's so many things, but again, there's not the earthquakes like in the Phil Mickelson biography. And I'm sure some readers will be a little disappointed, but is there's so many little nuggets and for me it's about providing the context, the framework of understanding and taking people places they can't go and tell them things they don't already know. And I mean I feel like there's stuff in every chapter and that's what my role is because Roy's had a public life. People kind of know his story. If the book's going to work, it's because you have to have so much fresh information
Absolutely.
and perspective. I was there for all the wins and all the losses, and so I have my own thoughts and I have my own analysis, and but I really relied on the voices of so many other people who lived it with Rory, and I think that's what gives the book its intimacy.
Who you picking to win the Masters?
Well, sentimentally, I'd love for Rory to win. That'd be amazing. Obviously, he tweaked his back, and he hasn't won so far this year, but he has played some good golf, and he's highly motivated. I feel like John Rahm is dangerous. He's kind of like this wounded bear. People are questioning his love for the game, his priorities. He's a man of immense pride. He's been playing at a high level, but since he went to live golf, he hasn't contended in a major. So I feel like he's due to bust loose one of these days. Um, I'll take Rory or Rom, but there's a lot of it's going to be. I feel like this Masters is pretty wide open. Scotty is not as big a favorite as he has been. Morikawa is now hurt. It's hard to identify a favorite based on their form, and so that's kind of fun. We'll see. Um, but the Masters, is the Masters. We know it's going to be a shootout on Sunday afternoon, and it would be awesome if Rory's part of it, just because if you could do it again, if you win back to back, that puts you in a whole different category. And so I have a partisan rooting interest, clearly, but I think it's gonna be fascinating to see how he answers the bell there.
Brilliant book, Alan. Congratulations. The book's called Rory. We'll see you in Augusta.
I look forward to it. Thanks for having me, Anna. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for being on Talking Golf.